Welcome to Marcor Studios, where here we will be interviewing different industry professionals and educating our homeowners as well as the industry as a whole. We hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Marcor Studios, everyone. I'm here with Kevin Rogers from Edwards & Company. He is an insurance broker. And can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the industry and what exactly, I know insurance is a broad term.
Sure,
so
yeah.
What kind of stuff you got in, what kind of stuff you're handling?
Cool. So yeah, thank you, Gina, for having me this morning.
Absolutely.
So I got into the business, family business. My uncle purchased it from his father-in-law back in the early 90s. Really been in our family since about the 1960s. Company was founded, however, in 1865. So currently I serve as president and CEO, but my role is large commercial accounts.
Okay.
So we range from, we have a large construction practice, we do a decent amount of public entity business, and we do a lot of large private companies, wholesalers, manufacturers, things of that nature. So that's really kind of our core focus, is large private property and casualty programs as well as public entities.
Okay. So with that, I mean, the construction obviously is,
Sure.
appealing to us.
Yep.
What are you seeing? A lot of people don't understand, and, the goal of this is really to educate both the industry and homeowners as a whole.
Sure.
But builders, developers, a lot of people understand that there's a cost of doing business, but they don't realize that, what the scaffold law is, what labor law is, how that applies. Can you explain to us just in a nutshell what labor law is and how it actually can affect liability in a claim?
Sure. So high level, the New York labor law, scaffolding law 240, 241, imposes strict liability on, it could be an owner, a developer, prime sub-trade, on any commercial job site. So that's kind of high level. So regardless of kind of what happens, those people have strict liability for an injury to any employee.
Okay. You're talking about the prime contractor or the main key person that's holding that main contract.
Pretty much everyone on the site, right?
Okay.
So the whole idea of indemnification agreements is downstream.
Correct. So you can tender those claims the right way and make sure that those subs or anyone underneath there, you also want to make sure they have the proper coverage and
correct.
But
the problem is that whoever the sub is who has that employee, the idea is it stops there.
Correct.
Right? So while you have an injured employee, they're getting paid out on workers' compensation. Now they can file what's called a third-party action against the owner, the developer, and what any prime, either general contractor or sub is. So not only are you paying workers' compensation, you can have a third-party action liability claim.
So then that actually can tender back with the goal is for everyone above that to have the proper insurance and
Correct.
below that to have the proper insurance, where you can tender the claim to the sub.
Whoever's employee that was. Correct. Yeah.
So then that's the way that the sub is holding both the liability and the comp side of things and protecting everyone above that.
Right. Yeah, and obviously anytime there's a break in that downstream indemnification, right, that person gets stuck, which is why what we're seeing is so many more owners, developers, and general contractors are becoming much more diligent in reviewing subcontractors' insurance.
Well, because then if they don't, now they're the
ones
paying it out, right? So now let's talk low level. Let's talk more on a residential aspect.
Sure.
Where does this come into play?
So it's like anything. There's exceptions to labor law, but there's exceptions to the exception, right? So the exception is a single family or two family dwelling.
Okay.
The owner is not subject to labor law. Right. So that's a misconception that a lot of trades have that say, well, it's a single family home. I don't need labor law coverage. Well, the second you subcontract any work as the contractor, maybe the owner, the homeowner, doesn't have a labor law exposure, but you as the prime sub on the job now does.
Correct.
You have a subcontract.
Which,
right?
I mean, think about it. How many people are doing a job, like even a roofing contractor? A lot of times they're subcontracting the gutters.
Getting a bathroom done. You're anything there, you're going to have electrical trades, HVAC trades, plumbing trades. Really no one is self-performing everything.
Correct.
Right.
Now, where does labor law really come into play? I know a lot of people refer to it from a height standpoint.
Yeah.
Because, it's also referred to as the scaffold law.
Sure.
People think, oh, well, I'm not using scaffolding. So where, it's labor law and scaffold law are one and the same.
It's really gravity, right? So you could be 10 feet down doing excavation, right?
And labor law applies.
Labor law applies. Something falls from above 6 feet, hits an employee on the head. It's a gravity-related loss.
You fall and trip on a pile of garbage. It's a problem. But so now let's take this one step further. How could this potentially affect a property owner on a single or two-family dwelling? Is there a possibility that there is an exposure to a homeowner in these situations?
So it could. So the exception to the exception is, are those properties being used for for-profit venture?
So.
Right. So let's think about that, for-profit. Is it fully rented out? Right? Is it an investment property?
Which plenty of people have on Long Island.
Are. Now, and is a contractor going to be aware of that?
Yep.
No, they're being called in by the owner.
Correct.
To do either, in your case, a roof.
Yep.
They're not going to necessarily mention, oh, by the way, this is rented, right? We have a tenant in there. So now that's a for-profit venture. Technically, that's an exception to the exception.
Okay. So then then a single or two-family homeowner would potentially be exposed then and have open liability there.
Correct. And then for-profit, again, it's large. Do you rent a portion of your home? Do you operate a business out of your home? These are all
home office. I mean, a lot of people have
cases in which you're drawing revenue from a piece of property. You know, and especially these rental companies, a lot of people purchasing them in LLCs.
Yep.
So they're
You're seeing that a lot with solar too. Is that because people want to have it in an LLC because they benefit from tax credits in that situation, and they're not realizing that by doing so, they are also opening up potential liabilities.
Right. And the difficult thing is the contractors working on those residences aren't necessarily privy to that.
Correct.
Right. So they don't even know that they have that exposure. They go in maybe the best intentions that, hey, I'm going to perform everything direct. I don't have any subs and it's a single family house. I don't need labor law.
Yep.
Now, in theory, that probably makes a lot of sense, but you don't necessarily know kind of what's behind the curtain, how that house is owned, what they're really using it for. So it's difficult. And this is why we try and educate our clients of saying, in New York, really, there's almost no reason why you should not have labor law coverage.
And the interesting thing is that New York labor law only applies to New York. And I mean, we've been lobbying against this for decades.
Yep.
We're obviously losing, and it's a losing battle because there is so much litigation. There's so much money that they're making money off of these things. And, from a trial standpoint. So what about the contractors on a residential basis? You and I have discussed over the, past couple of weeks even of the guys that think they have the proper insurance and don't. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Even just, the couple of policies we've been looking over.
Sure. So, I mean, something as simple as someone sends over a policy for review, and pretty much on the smaller side, everything has what's called a classification limitation endorsement, right? So whatever's written into the policy under your description of operations, your coverage is limited to that.
Correct.
Okay. So now most buyers of insurance would look and say, well, my description of ops, it's carpentry, siding, and roofing. So I have coverage for all of those things. Now you get into the guts. So in one case, right, that we looked at, we had someone that in that description of operations had carpentry, siding, roofing. Now you go into page 100 and whatever of the policy,
108.
And there's a total roofing exclusion.
Yeah.
Right. There's products completed operations exclusion. So you put a whole roof on, you leave the job, major leak, $400,000 or $500,000 claim for damage to the residence.
Yep.
There's no coverage. So it's great that it says it right there, but the guts of the policy are really where, you're going to see, especially in the residential, the smaller side. Like I always tell my contractors, my clients, if you get a copy of a policy in, and a lot of times they're redacted, so you don't know the cost, but if they come through non-redacted and you see anything like, oh, this policy is $4,200, don't waste your time reading it.
Yep.
It's really not. There's nothing there.
They bought very expensive paper, and that's all it is.
Correct. Don't waste your time reading 110 pages.
Yep.
Send it over to us. We'll look at it. And in about 5 minutes, we can send you 5 forms that say.
I mean, interestingly enough, in the roofing industry, we know that there's very few carriers that will write even steep slope roofing. So you kind of can tell just by the company name of if they're right. Are they covered for labor law or are they not? But now, if we can kind of dive into that, the ones that we reviewed over the last couple of weeks, not only was there the exclusion to roofing, there was also an exclusion to ongoing operations for use of subcontractors.
Yep.
So how does that affect everybody? And then what happened when we reviewed the subs policy?
Well, yeah. And the problem with no coverage for subcontractors is, listen, everyone gets hung up on the indemnity side of insurance, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times when you're buying insurance, now you can say it's an EPLI or cyber or pollution, you're buying defense.
Correct.
And you're buying specialized defense, not just any law firm, a law firm that specializes in something particular.
Correct.
So when you buy these policies that say, you know what, I'll take a full hammer clause because I only use 3 or 4 subs and I'm comfortable that they have the right insurance. Okay, great. In theory, that may work on the indemnity side, but you're self-insuring defense.
So you're
and
out of
anyone
pocket
that's
for
been
that.
through a New York labor law claim knows that these
Six-figure
drag
defenses.
on.
Yep.
So you're self-insuring that. And
Yeah.
that's a big piece. Your carrier's just not going to respond, right? Any insurance policy will only respond for defense
Yep.
under a covered peril. Like so there's gotta be a coverage trigger somewhere in the policy for a policyholder to get any defense from the carrier.
Yep.
Right. So
And-
that's a real misconception of why are you buying insurance?
Well, I mean,
Just
the ones
because
we
you
were-
get sued
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you're obligated or you have an indemnity issue, but you are going to have to go to court. You are going to have to defend it.
Yeah.
And that's really why a lot of people are buying insurance. That's the reality of
But
it.
the unfortunate thing is that, these policies that people are spending, we looked and I think, all in, I think the guy said he was paying $80,000 a year in insurance, and that insurance had no defense. It had not only a defense, it had no coverage.
Right.
And then when we reviewed the subcontractors policy, he said, hey, I subbed my roofing. You subbed the roofing. And what happened with the subcontractors policy that we reviewed?
Right. No roofing coverage.
So, and exclusion of bodily injury and all these.
So everyone's bare on the whole job.
Now, can you explain a little bit more on like a certificate of insurance? Because everybody's looking at an accord and saying, oh, well, reality is you can Photoshop whatever you want into that box. So trucks could drive all over Long Island saying we're licensed and insured.
Yep.
Does not mean that they have the right insurance. Can you explain that a little bit further as far as how a homeowner can make sure, or even how a contractor can verify that they have the right insurance?
So it's difficult because, an accord certificate is simply what an insurance policy may look like at a certain period in time.
Yep.
So that's why we always require copies of policies or an Accord 855, which is a specialized form in the state of New York that would require the subcontractor's broker to identify exclusions within the policy.
Okay.
Right. Those are typically, in addition, Edwards and Company went the next step further. So we did a whole subcontractor pre-qualification, submitted to the New York State Department of Financial Services, who approve it. Now you go on the New York State Department of Financial Services, they have approved certificates. If there's a certificate of insurance that's not on that website, you cannot force anyone to fill it out.
Really?
So now if you go on, you'll see a link for an Edwards, you pull it up. Now we can give that to our client to give to a sub and say, you have to fill this out and your broker has to notarize it. So if the broker says, oh no, you don't have any of these exclusions, okay, knowingly or just not knowingly, now you have recourse against the broker's errors and
Because
omissions.
now they're on the hook.
So
because
we,
they didn't
we've
do their job the right way.
Correct. And usually it's not done in malice, but the reality is a lot of brokers that don't handle construction really don't know.
Yeah.
They're not doing it purposely, but they're missing.
But the reality is you have to have specialized insurance, and somebody who knows what they're doing as far as that. You're not going to go, your goal is not going to be to go write, hospitality industry. That's not what you do. You're not writing, refrigeration trucks because it's just not what you do. There's different things and different liabilities that come in there. You're specialized in what you do.
Yes.
My biggest concern is that these contractors, like last night, I was at a trade show and I had a contractor talking to me. He's a roofing contractor and he wanted us to do some work for him. And he doesn't have labor law in his policy, and his sub currently doesn't have labor law, but he's willing to roll the dice. And he said it straight to me. I'm willing to roll the dice because I'm not spending that money on premiums. Yeah. And I'm willing to take the chance of what could possibly happen. I'll just deal with it when it happens. but they're not realizing the defense costs that are involved to do that, you know, and that they, even though they don't want to spend the money, that there is an open potential that a homeowner still can be responsible at the end of the day. Like you said, if there's a for-profit, what if they're flipping the house? What if it's a spec home? What if, somebody's just trying to GC their project themselves?
Sure.
Those types of things obviously will apply, right?
Absolutely.
So what do you like? A lot of the times when I explain to homeowners, like, it's okay to ask people about their insurance, and they're like, "Oh, well, they gave me their record certificate. They showed me that they'll list me additional insured, or they showed me that they have roofing coverage." And we obviously know that there's loopholes in these policies. Some people get embarrassed and nervous to start a project with somebody and ask those types of questions because they feel a little confrontational. And I tell people, if you're paying the right premiums, somebody's going to walk around with that in a frame and be happy to show you, right?
Yeah, sure.
So how do you, what kind of advice would you give to homeowners to say, aside from asking for, let's say, an 855, like, are they able to direct to their broker and say, like in my situation, I tell people, listen, if you want to verify my insurance, you call my broker and tell them, hey, I'm hiring Marcor to do a roof. Can I just verify that they actually have roofing coverage? Would that be a way that somebody can potentially protect themselves?
So absolutely. But again, now when you're talking about a true single family, right? So Gina, you hire someone to come in and do siding.
Yeah.
Okay. In theory, right, if you own the house, it's just you're not running a business out of it, you don't really have a labor law exposure per se as the homeowner. So you have homeowners insurance, maybe you have an umbrella, and those policies aren't going to exclude any injury, right?
Correct.
Even if a suit's brought to you, which would be very difficult. So in those cases, I would still contact whoever writes your homeowner's insurance, say, I'm looking to hire so-and-so, or I'm doing this work, what recommendations would you have? And typically, yes, get certificates of insurance, definitely workers' comp to make sure, because the bigger issue that we're seeing is, you have these guys come in and they have a workers' comp policy, but it's an owner and 4 guys. The 4 guys aren't on the payroll and the owner excludes himself. So
and they got nothing.
And they really got nothing but a piece of paper.
Yep.
So,
which we see happen all of the time.
That I think is a larger issue potentially for homeowners, is having a lot of people on your premises without workers' comp as a single family homeowner.
So we're talking liability. There's really 2 sides. There's the liability during the project.
Sure.
God forbid somebody were to get injured.
Yep.
But let's talk about the ongoing operations after the project's done, to make sure you don't have that taillight warranty and you have some recourse after the fact.
Correct.
When we have somebody that says, hey, I have roofing coverage, but there's actually at page 108 a roofing exclusion or something like that, or they subcontracted the work and there's an exclusion. How does a homeowner protect themselves from that?
So that, again, that would be shown on the certificate in theory, right, under products completed operations.
Correct.
You're either going to see excluded or you're going to see a limit.
On the 855.
Well, even on a regular Accord form,
okay,
right, you should see a limit of insurance there. So as a result, okay, God forbid they put the roof on, 6 months later, there's a major issue, be it a leak or something happens, installed it properly. You do have some recourse back to the contractor.
Okay.
Right. And that's the other reason why we always recommend getting the certificates. It's not necessarily that it's going to provide you any level of indemnification, because you don't have written contracts.
Yep.
All these additional insured, that's the other thing. Oh, I'm additional insured. No one has written contracts. And every additional insured endorsement at the end states as per written contract. Right. So when you don't have a written contract, the additional insured endorsements don't do anything.
Yeah.
Right. So as a homeowner, you're usually not going to have that. You're going to have a proposal and you're going to sign it. So there's no written contract for indemnification.
Okay.
But God forbid something happens. Now you can file a direct third-party claim against that contractor if there's damage.
Yep.
Because you have all the insurance information, right? It's not hard to find out, okay, I go on the website, I find out the claims, I put in a claim, and now you can deal direct.
Yeah. And now when certain things happen, God forbid somebody does have a problem with their house, a lot of the times we've heard other companies when they say, maybe another company experienced a leak or something like that, they're pushing them to go to their homeowner's insurance and saying, just file a claim at your homeowner's insurance instead of going through the contractor's insurance. What's your advice on that situation?
Well, I think it depends who you're representing, right? If you're representing the homeowner, you can say, well, why would you put in a claim for someone else? This is someone else's fault.
Yeah.
So especially what we're seeing on Long Island with the cost of homeowners insurance.
Yeah.
Okay. A claim is becoming more impactful at any level to say, all right, now we have a claim on the property. Oh, what was it? It was a roof. It was water damage. Carriers are looking to get off of, Long Island, I don't care where you live.
Yep.
When you look at it from a large scale, it's all coastal.
Yeah, it's
right.
It sure
so
is.
we don't have new carriers jumping in to say, I want to write millions and millions of dollars of frame construction on an island.
Yeah.
So, no, we would tell the homeowners you should push back directly against the contractor who caused the damage. Yeah. And even if you're representing the contractor, well, we caused damage. What do you think we should do? Well, you can do one of two things. You can file a claim, or you make an agreement with the homeowner to just fix it.
So now in all of your years doing this, which we know you haven't been doing this for a short period of time, if you had to guess how many people have the right insurance as a contractor residentially, what would that percentage approximately be?
I would have to say you're under 20%.
Under 20%. So under 20% of residential contractors are not properly insured.
Correct. For what they're doing.
That's a scary
For
number.
what they're doing.
That's a very scary number.
Yeah. And again, when I use that percentage, I'm talking, from corporations down to the handymen that are coming in and performing one or two things, a lot of which have no insurance, right? Well, I have workers' comp. Well, it's just me. I don't need liability. But you look broad brush on the residential side, it's a major issue. So
let's talk the crazy scenario of, let's say I own a rental home. I don't know. I'm not a contractor. I'm going to put a rental home hat on. I own a rental home. I hire Joe's Roofing to come in here, and he says he's got roofing coverage, and he subs it to ABC Roofing, and ABC Roofing has an exclusion, and it's a flip house or it's a rental property, and something happens, and there's exclusions. How do I know as a homeowner? I don't know that they're subcontracting the work. I don't know the insurance of the subs. Nobody's exposing who the subs are. So it's really putting a homeowner in a very bad spot.
Absolutely.
So that's why making sure that the buck stops so maybe when you tender the claim down and you can't get it to the sub, it stops now at the general contractor, which is the roofing contractor you hired.
Right.
You at least have to make sure they have the right insurance. If they want to sub and they want to roll those dice, at least the homeowner who has a rental property or it's a for-profit company out of that house, which let's say, since COVID, we know that that's increased exponentially.
Sure.
So now, everybody wants to work remote. Everybody wants to, have their own businesses these days, be able to have write-offs, X, Y, whatever the situation may have you. The goal at that point then, you're saying, would be to make sure at least that person you have a contract, make sure you do have a written contract, and also make sure that that person you have the contract with, that insurance is bulletproof.
Yes.
At least at that level, so it doesn't bump next to the homeowner. And if it does, it tenders back to that GC.
Correct. And as the homeowner, to make sure that your insurer, as the owner of that property, is aware of what you're doing with it.
Correct.
Right? Like usage, when it comes to any insurance policy, like usage is a big thing.
Yeah.
So if they think, because a lot of people, they have a primary home, they trade up. And some people say, you know what, maybe my house is paid off or I have such a small mortgage, I'm going to keep it and rent it.
Yep.
Right? So do they always update their insurance now?
No.
So if now it's rented, maybe they kept it in their individual name, so it's not an LLC. Okay, fine. But they're still renewing this policy that says right on the deck page, primary dwelling, primary dwelling.
Yep.
So now in the event of a claim, in theory, they're going to say, well, I do have liability insurance. Liability insurance doesn't exclude any injury to contractors, right? It's broad on the personal side. But then the client or the carrier finds out that, well, this is rented. You haven't been in this house and you're renting this, you could really run into an issue.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a labor law claim. It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And if you've gone through a renewal process where you've signed applications and you haven't notified the carrier in a change of usage, you could have a real issue as the homeowner.
Absolutely.
So now you have all these contractors on the job with no insurance. A big claim comes around to you as the homeowner, and now your homeowner carrier is saying, oh, wait, no, we're not going to cover you. You never told us it was a rental.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one last question I have is, a lot of the times when I'm dealing with a homeowner, and, insurance, obviously, I talk a lot about when I'm with a homeowner, and because it is such an important part of the project, it's important. The warranties are important. The products you're getting are important. The workmanship is important. But to me, the insurance is the number one key.
Yeah.
So obviously we know that insurance, and a lot of people don't realize that insurance it's not an insurance policy for the workmanship. The workmanship falls on the contractor.
Correct.
And insurance isn't going to cover faulty workmanship.
No.
However, the resulting damages of the faulty workmanship, I have had homeowner after homeowner say, well, that's what I have homeowners insurance for. And you kind of just hit the nail on the head by saying, you want to limit your claims to, yes, it's an actual claim.
Yeah.
But your homeowner's insurance policy, can you clarify? Yeah, and even with the injury to a worker on your property, if there was this disconnect in the insurance,
right?
Really, where does your homeowner's insurance stand? Because the reality is, are they stepping in for a bodily injury situation?
Mm-hmm.
If you are directing work, let's say, or you are flipping a house, or you're a GC, and we use that GC, general contractor term, kind of loosely.
Yes. Because
you could be wanting to coordinate work on your home.
Yep.
And you're now a GC. Or you can hire a roofing contractor or a siding contractor or both, let's say, and they're bringing in a roofing sub and a gutter sub. They are now the GC.
Yep.
So these roofing contractors don't realize that they are a general contractor in those cases.
Sure.
If they're not, even if they're not self-performing one trade, now you're a general contractor.
Yeah.
They're very good at getting the general contractor overhead and profit when there's an insurance claim.
Sure.
And they're on the other side of it,
Yep.
but they don't want to be the GC on the
No.
when they're when it's their insurance at risk.
Correct.
But when a homeowner is dealing with these types of situations, and can you clarify, is that answer a valid one? I imagine it would be insurance policy to insurance policy, but does an insurance company, a homeowner's insurance policy, step in if somebody were to get hurt, or if there were damage to the property? Then
So they would. It all comes down to, from a property damage standpoint, was it sudden and incidental, right? Insurance policies aren't maintenance policies.
correct.
So the issue you run into, a new roof was put on, it was a slow leak. And then 6 months later, we discovered, hey, we have this major issue. Probably no coverage there, right?
Yep.
Pipe bursts, coverage, right? Water damage,
Mechanical
sudden,
failure.
incidental, certain kinds of mechanical failure, not all, but certain kinds of mechanical failure. So it really depends on the claim, and it really depends on the carrier. I mean, even on the homeowner side, not so much on the liability where you see limitations of coverage is on the property side. We excluded water damage, or we exclude this, and that exists as well on the homeowner side. So the consumers really also need to be looking at their
own
homeowner's insurance policy, say, hey, in the event something happens, right, and I can't collect directly from the contractor. Who knows? Maybe they didn't have insurance. I don't have a copy of their insurance. They're not a business anymore.
Yep.
Do I actually have coverage for certain kinds of property damage?
And that's the biggest thing right now. I think that the insurance companies, when they're writing homeowners insurance, they're trying to limit liability. They're trying to limit their exposure. So like we're even seeing on homeowners insurance policies, if let's say somebody has damage to their roof, let's say a tree fell on their house.
Yep.
We're seeing actually in other parts of the nation, even where there's a lot of storm chasers and hail damage, that they're actually writing actual cash value on roof replacements versus replacement cost.
Yep.
And homeowners are signing off on that. I actually ran off to one up in Westchester. And at that point, you run into these situations and a homeowner's like, well, I didn't know that I didn't have full coverage, but you signed your policy when you renewed it. You got to read those things and understand what you're doing.
Especially on roofs. Yeah. That's become the biggest issue. If you can buy a 40-year roof, right? But the insurance carriers are saying, well, any roof over 20 years is ACV, right? We had a client inherit a piece of property in Florida. He had just put on like a $75,000 tile roof about 21 years ago, right? It's a 50-year roof.
Yeah.
Couldn't get insurance. Had to replace the whole roof
In order to get coverage.
coverage.
And we're
So
seeing
it's
a
an
lot of
issue.
that.
Otherwise, you have this AC actual cash value valuation.
Yep.
So now they say your roof's 20 years old, a new roof's going to be $35,000. We'll give you 18. Can't replace a roof for 18,
Absolutely.
right? So
now you're coming
those
out
are
of pocket.
issues.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Those are issues.
And, you know, you're talking people are taking bigger deductibles, things like that. But it's definitely getting scary out here.
Yeah.
So
And again, shared risk is a good thing if you know about it. Unfortunately, far too many consumers aren't actually aware that they're sharing this risk because they're either not reading it or they're not being told that they have these issues in their policies.
So one last thing that just came to me is that we're seeing a lot of, we do a lot of solar service and a lot of maintenance of, troubleshooting leaks that have solar. And we're starting to really see a lot of these solar companies that are like these sales organizations that they're saying, or these other companies that came in the last, 5, 10, 15 years, pushing solar on houses, older roofs, 2-3 layer houses, that a lot of them could potentially be against code.
Yep.
Or, it was a 25-year shingle that they put it in, put solar on the 18th year and solar's going to last, let's say 25.
Yep.
And now we're seeing the insurance companies costing the homeowner the system removal and reinstallation and replacing the roof because now they're wanting to drop the insurance. Now the solar's a liability. You got the roof that they're exposed on a liability. So they want to limit their liability. So we're getting a lot of calls for that stuff now too.
Sure.
So we're seeing that roofing contractors right now are trying to remove and reinstall solar. Now, with us, we have 2 separate divisions with 2 separate companies and 2 separate insurance policies. Why did we do that? For liability purposes.
Sure.
What happens if a roofing contractor goes and touches a solar system and they don't have coverage to touch anything with electric?
You're going to have a major issue.
Who? The homeowner.
Everyone involved.
Okay.
Everyone involved is going to have an issue.
So all these roofers that are touching solar that don't have proper coverage to even touch solar.
Right.
The homeowner is fully exposed.
Correct. Because you look at carriers writing solar aren't necessarily insurance carriers that are writing roofing.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Correct.
Right. So there's a reason in Marcor's situation too that you have 2 separate policies.
Correct. And 2 separate companies. And then we work between the 2 companies to make sure that our homeowners are properly protected and internally we're properly protected.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Well, I really thank you so much for your time today.
Thank
if
you,
anyone
Gina.
ever wants to reach out to you, what is the best way for them to reach out to you at you or Edwards & Company?
Sure. So my direct line is 631-472-8404, or everything is on our website at www.edwardsandco.net.
Beautiful.
All
I
right.
really appreciate all your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is great.
All right. Thanks, Gina.